Yeah. Um, Thank you, Christine. On behalf of Elizabeth and I, we're very happy to be here today to talk about some of these important issues. Um, Ageism is a point that we hear a lot about, but we don't always know what it is. And we also don't take some accountability ourselves for how ageism continues to thrive in this culture. So, briefly, some definitions. I'm going to talk mostly about ageism, and then Elizabeth is going to follow with specifics about age discrimination, which is different than ageism. Ageism is really a prejudice based on a person's age. We're familiar with racism, with uh, other kinds of isms, but ageism is still the last acceptable prejudice. We allow others and ourselves to talk about age in a very negative way that we would never allow were we talking about race or gender or disability. It really is a matter of othering. And what othering is talking about them, they, them, different than us. But what's ironic too about ageism is that it's a prejudice against our own future self. When we decry people who are older or dismiss them, what we're saying is when we get to that age, we're going to be dismissed and discouraged from participating in life. Ageism really falls in two areas, and I'm going to talk about the cultural side. How we as a culture in this country support and encourage ageism. And then Elizabeth is going to talk about it more in a legal context, how ageism turns into age discrimination and falls under the ADEA, which prohibits discrimination against applicants and employees who are age 40 and older. So I'll talk about the cultural things, and then Elizabeth will talk about the legal side. We're happy to take questions as we go along, so please enter them in the chat, and we will get to them as soon as we can. Next slide. I mentioned that ageism is pervasive in our culture. And no matter which way you look at our culture, we see ageism raising its ugly head. We certainly see it in policy, both public policy and social policy. If I've heard this phrase once, I've heard it 100 times, that when we spend money on children, we're investing in our future. Our children are our future. And that's true. And I'm certainly not suggesting we pit one population against another. But when we spend money on older people, we call it an expense, that we have become expensive, that Social Security is unaffordable, that we can't afford good nursing home reform. All of the things that we would spend on older people is considered an expense. Now, what's the difference between an investment and an expense? Well, when you make an investment, like we talk about doing with children, you expect a return. We're going to put money into children so that as they grow, they thrive, they become better citizens, better members of our community. But an expense is not considered to have a return. So it's more like a sunk cost. So when we spend money on older people, we don't expect a return. We don't expect their lives and our collective lives to be better. They're just a cost. And that's ageism active on the policy level. There's no question in media and advertising that we see ageism play out all over. Age enhances men. The silver fox, the beautiful older man, and it diminishes women. We have gray hair, we have wrinkles. There's nothing silver foxy about how our media and advertising portray older women. And just as a statistic that I think is pretty shocking, is that by telling women not to look their age, in 2016, which is 6 years ago, and the last data that I have on this, but we can only imagine it's gone up since then. We have spent $16 billion on the kind of plastic surgery that will help us not look our age. Why is it so bad to look our age? It is what we are. Could you go back? Thank you. So, media and advertising, and I don't know what insurance company it is, but there's one out now that says we're trying to keep you from being your parents. And they portray the parents as fuddy duddies, as out of touch, as no longer relevant. So, no matter where you look at media and advertising, you will see ageism running rampant. We also see it in health and other social service care. Many clinical guidelines about when to get preventive services, when not, were developed when people had shorter life expectancy. And what did that mean? That meant, should you have a mammogram after 70? Should you have a prostate exam after 75? And the way they made those decisions was to say, how much longer is this person going to live? And what's the value of doing this intervention or this test or this procedure against their likelihood of living longer? And only recently have we begun to say, wait a minute, people are living longer, they're living healthier lives. Of course, you should have a mammogram after 70. Of course, you should have a prostate exam after 75. They are no longer kind of the limits on when society will benefit from you getting these kinds of preventive services. Another example of how healthcare is really ageist in its approach is that geriatricians, which we need more of all the time as the population ages, are the least paid medical specialty. So, what's the incentive for a provider to go into geriatric medicine? If they're going to be paid less, they're not going to be valued like an internist or a pediatrician or, heaven forbid, a specialist. So we see fewer and fewer geriatricians at a time when older people have more complex systems, live longer, thrive longer, and really need that kind of specialized care. So these are certainly three areas where we see ageism pervasive. Go on. Um, we also see it in everyday communication. I don't know how many of you have been called sweetie or honey. I particularly hate that when I go for an appointment and they bring me into the room and they say, now, honey, we're going to, and it's always we in a very loud and slower voice. Now, honey, we're going to take your blood pressure. So don't worry about this. And they also, in many, many cases, whether it's the bank, whether it's healthcare, whether it's even in retail, they will talk to the younger person with us about us. Your mother needs to know that this dress does not come in this size. I'm right there. Talk to me. Why don't you say, ma'am, this dress does not come in your size? Why wouldn't you communicate directly to me without the sweeties and the honeys rather than to the person who is, quote, younger and therefore more able to comprehend and understand what it is I'm trying to say? We also, in our culture, make generalizations, and we do that with all ages. How many times have you heard teenagers are all a bunch of idiots? We weren't like that. They just stick their noses in their phones. They can't communicate, whatever. That's othering, and that's ageism directed at a different population. Addressed against older people, which is where uh, ageism primarily falls, people assume we're too old to learn difficult things. We hear this all the time, whether it's computers, whether it's a new way of managing our finances, whether it's just a new way of traveling. We are assumed to be too old to learn difficult things. And it's also a generalization that says everybody's going to get dementia. It's only a matter of time. So when I forget something, it's not just that I forgot something like any human being could do, it's a sign of my deterioration. It's a way for ageism to tell the world that I'm no longer competent. And we do that all the time. But the most damaging thing about ageism is not what other people do to us, it's what we internalize about ourselves. We buy this idea that we are no longer competent, that we are no longer able to do what we needed to do. And because we're no longer able physically or financially, that devalues our worth and meaning. So we become our own worst enemy. If you remember the old cartoon, Little Abner, Pogo was in that, and Pogo would keep saying, "We we have seen the enemy, and he is us." And that's really where we are with ageism in our culture. We individuals who are aging, and we all are, we buy this story that we're no longer capable. And we do that to ourselves so that we then accept it from other people and we accept it from policy. You know, my knee hurts. Well, that's because I'm getting old. But my other knee is just as old and it doesn't hurt. So maybe there's another reason. Our bodies do change over time when we move from adolescence to young adulthood to, if you're a woman, to when you have children, to middle age. Our bodies do change. But that does not mean that that's a slap at our competence, our ability to function and be valued in the world. When we surrender everything to age, we contribute to our own view of ageism and it gives it power and direction in driving our lives, the lives of others, and the lives of our policy direction. So, what can we do about it? Let's look at, oh, before we do that, I forgot this slide. No, you can go back to there. They did a national poll on healthy aging through the University of Michigan. And they asked people who experience these everyday forms of ageism. And all you have to do is look at this chart and then ask, have I felt this? Have I read jokes? There is now a series of birthday cards for older people that are positive and affirmations about getting older, rather than talking about sagging boobs and poor memory and inability to function in the world today. Those cards are really important to the people who get them because it validates them as contributing members of our society. We hear things about being unattractive or undesirable. Um, you know, if you're lonely, it must be because you're getting older. And for many people, it comes in combination with getting older. You might be widowed. You might not be in a relationship. Your children might have moved away. And that feeling lonely is real, but it doesn't mean that everybody who gets older feels lonely or depressed or sad. These are things that happen to some people and not to others. And how we look at our own beliefs about ourselves has a lot to do with the impact of depression, loneliness, etc., on our lives. People assume I have difficulty hearing and seeing things. That's why you'll hear such louder voices. Oh, Mary, sweetie, come over here and sit down, rather than talking in a normal voice. Memory is another. I forget stuff. You forget stuff. That's a natural part of life. And as our brain ages, we might forget a little bit more than otherwise. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be reminded or that our little loss of memory shouldn't be tolerated by the people around us and not be challenged as part of this part of just getting old and therefore getting worthless. The last one on this chart, and I think it's a really important one, people insist on helping me with things I can do on my own. I'm sure that's happened to you. It certainly has me. I'm in the store and I'm juggling a few things, and someone says, "Here, let me help you." And they reach in to help me. I didn't ask for help. I don't need help. But we're assumed not to be our own agency. And therefore, people will just step in out of trying to be nice before they say, "Can I help? Or is there a way that I can help?" That's respect for each other as people. And as we get older, that border of respect, that way of treating people blurs. And we are assumed to need the help, whether we ask for it or not. So these are all things that people experience. And I'd be interested in the chat how much of this you see yourself. So going on to the next then, what can we do about it? The first is to be proud of your age. How many of you are reluctant to tell people how old you are? What does that say about how you think about your age? Why wouldn't you tell people how old you are? When I tell people that I am 75, I bet you know the first thing I hear. "Oh, you don't look it." Well, maybe you wouldn't think that's the first thing I hear, but it's often the first thing I hear. "Oh, you don't look it." And my response is always, "Well, this is how it looks." I don't know what this person who says you don't look it thinks 75 looks like. And they feel that I should feel proud that I don't look my age. I see it the reverse. It took a rich, full life for me to get here. A lot of adventures, some sad, some happy. And I want to be here. I don't want to be dead. And so when someone says, "Oh, you don't look your age," what they're saying to you is your age, if you looked it, would be unattractive. So I think that's really important to be proud of your age. I've been in groups talking about this where I say, "How old is everyone?" And you immediately, some people put their head down. They immediately stop wanting to face the fact that they are your age. Stop the self blame game. We get enough of external blame. Stop doing it yourself. I like this line. When you lost your car keys at 16, it wasn't because you were getting old. So losing your car keys now does not necessarily mean it's because you were getting old. It's because you were preoccupied when you put them down and you weren't attending to the task. So, it's not always because you're aging. As I said, when you lost your car keys at 16, it wasn't because you were getting too old. Intergenerational opportunities are something we all can do, and it's very important to do that. Non exposure to people who are not our age contributes to the othering that goes on, contributes to us not understanding them. I'll give you an example. One of the best intergenerational programs that I've seen is where a school gave teenagers cameras and gave older people cameras. And the task was to take photos of each other, to take photos and write a story about each other. And for the first time in a long time, these were inner city kids. These were older people, many in nursing homes, many with very rich multicultural histories. They began to talk with one another. They began to see that we weren't kind of the ciphers, the unknowns, the others that everybody thought we were. So, where you have a chance within your organization or your family to create intergenerational opportunities, I really urge you to do that. This one is one of my biggest problems. When you are talked down to or your name isn't used, please speak up. You can do it politely. You can say, as I put on this slide, excuse me, but I would prefer you use my name. Now, that's not a hostile statement like saying, you stupid person, why are you calling me that? I hate that. That's probably not going to get you very far. But to say, excuse me, but I would prefer you use my name is a very polite way of reminding the other person that you are not sweetie, that you are not honey, that you are not some unnamed person, but you in fact have a name and you want it to be respected and used. I'll give you a little example here that is a little bit off the point, but I think that it's really relevant. I was in a doctor's office, and when I was finished, the doctor ripped off a piece of paper and said, "Give this to the girls outside." That happens to be one of my particular uh, uh, hitting points, is the use of the word girl. You would never hear the use of the word boy the same, but this is more of a gender discussion. He said, "Give this to the girls outside." And I said, "They're women." And he said, "Well, I know, but I want them to feel young." And I said, "Well, let me just say that calling them girls does not accomplish what you're trying to do." And he nodded and smiled, and I went out. And the next time I saw that doctor, we sat down, and when we were done, he ripped off the page and he looked at me with this little sly grin. And he said, "Give this to the staff up front." And I laughed and he laughed. And I thought, now, I don't know if he used the word staff with any other patient but me, but it was important that I had said in a polite way what I wanted and what I thought was important to break that ageism barrier. When you're with someone else and they speak to you, ask them, "Please speak to my mother. She is the patient, she is the client, she is the customer here. I am just accompanying her." Catch these ageist behaviors in the moment and change them. That is something you can do, only you can do, and it will impact the entire culture that we live in. So before I turn it over to Elizabeth to hear more from her about the legal aspects of what we're talking about, I wanted to just share with you a brief YouTube video that addresses this. And I want you to think as you listen to this how you play into these stereotypes, how you contribute to ageism as a cultural thing. And meanwhile, I'll just check the chat to see if there's any questions that people have. We will have plenty of time for questions later, so please don't hesitate. So before you start this is a video that AARP has done around ageism, and as I said, I want you to look at it uh, as something that would relate to you, that you could see about changing your behavior. So, Elizabeth, take it away. It's not moving for me. I don't know if it's moving for you, Elizabeth. Well, I'm going to ask you, Elizabeth, to start it over. Try going out and coming back. And meanwhile, is there anyone who has a comment from the chat room that they'd like either me to address while this is setting up, or that
You're
you'd
not
like
hearing the video?
No, we're not. It's not moving. It's frozen.
Oh. Are you hearing anything or no?
No.
Okay, I will X out and try one more time.
Okay. Any comments from participants that you would Okay, well, while she's doing that, let me just talk a little bit more. There's a whole effort underway among providers and people interested, activists in aging, called Changing the Narrative, and how we can go about changing the. Here we go.
How you doing?
Hi, good.
Have you ever done this before?
No, it's exciting.
So tell me, how old are you?
19, 24, 29.
I'm 41. I'm going to be a mother for the first time.
42.
71.
I'm 74.
I'm ready.
Okay, so we're just going to talk. You're going to show me stuff. Do I need my glasses?
I'm going to show you some slides, and I'd like you to fill in the blank and put the words "for her age" at the end of the sentence.
All right.
She has flawless skin for her age. Beautiful for her age.
She looks better than most 20-year-olds for her age.
She looks great.
She is beautiful.
Fierce for her age.
In burlesque, I love it.
That might be a little bit inappropriate for her age.
Jane looks amazing for her age.
She doesn't look her age. She's pretty hot.
For her age.
For her age.
Her age. I'm going to show you some other slides now. So I'm just going to ask you to read the sentences that we provided for you.
Okay.
She dances well for a white girl.
That's not nice at all.
It's just ridiculous.
She's rich for an immigrant.
No, that's so gross.
She's funny for an Asian.
Oh my God, they're getting worse.
Well, this girl's half Asian. And me and her dad are pretty freaking funny, so she's going to be funny.
She's pretty for a thick girl. I hate that. Beauty should not be defined by your size. Yeah, I hate that. She drives well for a woman.
You can't think like that. And then you bring up your kids like that. Then you have a society like that. We got another one? Is it going to be worse? There we are.
She looks good for her age.
So I didn't expect this to fall apart.
They're all the same, narrow-minded and ignorant.
I'm guilty. I say for her age all the time. It's harder to look good in your late 40s. You can be hot at 23 and you just roll out of bed.
Sometimes I think it's good and sometimes I don't.
I didn't realize I was really insulting anybody because it's only because if someone says it to me, I think it's good.
It's not a compliment.
It's really like a backhanded compliment.
I think it is a bias. People are definitely labeled by their age.
I guess for her age is more commonly accepted. This is okay to say, which is like, why?
You look good is a lovely compliment, but to qualify it, you're saying, well, in comparison to the mainstream of beauty, you don't look good, but you look good for how old you are.
It's degrading.
I think everyone should understand this. I think people be treated differently.
Say you look good, period. You know, don't add for her age.
No, I'm going to leave the for your age part off.
Unless you're asked these questions, I don't think you have the mind to start this conversation.
You know what? Everyone's going to get older.
Take that to heart, and we'll talk again. And I'm going to turn this now over to Elizabeth to talk about the legal aspects of ageism and age discrimination. Take it away, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Anne. That was a very powerful video. And I share your revulsion at the term girls. It makes my skin crawl. And I appreciate that you speak up when you hear those types of things, because that's one of the things we teach in the harassment context, especially sexual harassment, but all types of harassment at the EEOC, is how important it is for bystanders, people who aren't the subject of the degrading comment, the ageist comment, the sexist comment, the racist comment, to speak up and to call it out when that's brought to their attention. So thank you again for that. I am Elizabeth Fox Solomon. I'm Chief of Staff at the EEOC. I will give us a quick overview of my agency. Then I'm going to talk about the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. And then I'm going to talk about some of the case examples that we see, which I think sort of illustrate some of the dry legal concepts. And I apologize for those in advance. So about the EEOC, we are the primary federal agency that's responsible for enforcing the nation's laws against employment discrimination. Our mission is to prevent and remedy discrimination and advance equal opportunity for all in the workplace. Our jurisdiction, we have jurisdiction over private employers, state and local governments, and the federal government as an employer. And we receive discrimination complaints from the public. We can also generate investigations. So if we learn of discriminatory conduct going on in a workplace, the commissioners or the agency can direct an investigation of age discrimination and other types of discrimination. We try to resolve complaints that are brought to our attention through things like our mediation program, informal voluntary settlements. And then also, if required, we litigate. So we sue employers in federal court on behalf of victims of discrimination. And that was my prior job at the EEOC, was a trial attorney, and I'll talk about a couple of my cases. We also provide guidance and information to help educate the public about their rights and responsibilities under the laws we enforce. And we have field offices across the country, including a local office here in Buffalo, and the address and information will be at the end of the slides. So EEOC enforces laws prohibiting discrimination in employment on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, which includes pregnancy, gender identity, and sexual orientation, as well as national origin, disability, genetic information, and age. And all of our statutes prohibit retaliation for protected activity. So if you speak up in the workplace about discrimination or bias or unfair treatment, you cannot be retaliated against by your employer for bringing those issues to their attention. And we see a lot of retaliation-based complaints. So as most relevant to our discussion today is the Age Discrimination in Employment Act, or ADEA. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, sex, color, religion, and national origin. When Title VII was passed, Congress had a robust discussion about whether age should be included as a protected basis, and ultimately they decided not to. Instead, they asked the Department of Labor to study the issue. And Congress, the Labor Department came out with a report in 1965, which found that age discrimination was rampant in the workplace, but that it was different than some of these other types of discrimination. And as Anne said at the beginning, it's a type of discrimination that we tolerate and that we think is acceptable in society. And what the report found is most age discrimination is not based on hatred or dislike, hostility. It's based on stereotypes about older people and their ability to do work. And so the report also found that age discrimination was most common against workers who are 45 years of age and older. And so Congress took this and passed the ADEA in 1967. The purpose of the statute is to prohibit age discrimination in the workplace, promote the employment of older persons, and require that employers make decisions based on ability, not assumptions about age. The ADEA applies to private employers as long as they have 20 or more employees. It applies to federal, state, and local governments, employment agencies, and we actually see quite a bit of age discrimination with staffing agencies and temporary employment agencies, as well as unions and labor organizations. So, quick primer on the ADEA. It prohibits discrimination against people who are 40 years of age or older. It does not protect workers who are younger than 40. So we get a lot of calls from, an 18-year-old or a 20-year-old who calls us up and says, I was rejected from a job because they said I was immature, or they didn't think I had enough experience. Well, that's not age discrimination under the ADEA. It protects older workers, age 40 or older. And age is relative. So we see a lot of cases involving, perhaps a 50-year-old and a 70-year-old in the workplace. If you favor the 50-year-old over the 70-year-old, that's discrimination, even though both of those individuals are over the age of 40. So it's relative. You can't treat relatively older workers worse because of age. And you are allowed, on the other hand, to give preference to older workers. So an example of this is, during the pandemic, at the very outset, we told employers, employers were concerned and older workers were coming to them and saying, I'm concerned about my heightened risk of complications from COVID-19 based on CDC guidance, saying that the risk of mortality and other issues increases with age. And employers wanted to do something for their employees, but were concerned about, sort of backlash from younger workers. And what we told employers is, look, you can offer workplace flexibilities like remote work, telework, those types of things for older workers, even though you're not going to provide those things to younger workers. It is okay to favor older workers under the ADEA. So a few quick stats about how common age discrimination is. Over the past 5 years, our agency has received over 82,000 charges of age discrimination. And as you might imagine, that is just the tip of the iceberg. The vast majority of discrimination that occurs in the workplace is not reported. People may not even tell their family or close friends, let alone come to a federal agency and report it. So that is a vastly underreported number. AARP recently did a survey that showed between 2 out of 3 workers between 45 and 74 have seen or experienced age discrimination at work. 2 out of 3 workers. And almost a third of women who have looked for a new job since turning 40 experienced age discrimination in their search. And Anne alluded to this in her presentation, but we certainly see not just age discrimination and sex discrimination as separate categories, but that intersectional discrimination where older women workers in particular are discriminated against and disfavored compared to older men workers. So what are the types of claims that you could bring under the ADA, or the types of things that are unlawful? The law prohibits discrimination in employment, in any aspect of employment. So this is hiring, firing, layoffs, pay, job assignments, promotions, training, benefits. You can't pay someone lesser benefits because of their age, and any other term or condition of employment. So the ADEA prohibits intentional discrimination, intentionally treating someone worse off because of their age. It also makes unlawful employment policies or practices that might be neutral on their face. They might not mention age, but they have an adverse impact, a disproportionate impact on older workers. That can also be illegal. And it's unlawful to harass someone based on their age. And we see a lot of harassment. That's sort of where the ageism, the age bias that we talked about, becomes conduct in the workplace, and that's where it becomes illegal. So to illustrate these concepts, I wanted to talk about a few recent cases that the EEOC has brought in this area. We see all types of claims, but most of the cases we see, I would say, involve discrimination in hiring and then also layoffs or terminations. So the one case that's really near and dear to my heart is EEOC's nationwide class action lawsuit against Texas Roadhouse. There's a couple Texas Roadhouses in Buffalo that were part of our class action suit. And we found that Texas Roadhouse refused to hire older workers for public-facing positions like servers, hosts, and bartenders in restaurants across the country. Texas Roadhouse trained their hiring managers to screen out older workers for front-of-house positions. Their training materials, and we showed this in front of a jury in Boston, and I think this is one of the things that really struck the jury. Their training materials began with a photo of a wilted head of lettuce. And then next to it was a fresh head of lettuce. And the company told its hiring managers that just like a store shouldn't accept brown lettuce from a vendor, a restaurant should not accept a worker who is not fresh or green. Managers were told to hire for image, and it was clear that image meant young. We represented older workers, 60s, 70s, who had been lifelong servers, phenomenal at their jobs. And when they applied for jobs at the restaurant, they were asked questions like, aren't you a bit too old to be applying for this job? How do you feel about working with younger people? Do you think you'd fit in here? And we're looking for young, energetic people. Does that sound like you? So our agency took that case to trial, and we got $12 million for applicants who were denied jobs based on their age. Another case the EEOC recently brought was with a computer science company that engaged in a nationwide pattern of firing older workers. The company had a series of mass layoffs. It described them as cost-cutting reasons. But at the same time these layoffs were going on, the CEO of the company expressed his desire for younger workers. He said he wanted to, quote, transform the company, was looking to be more agile, and that he hopes to bring in high energy people. And so our investigation found that older workers were laid off at a much higher rate than younger workers, even though the older workers had better performance ratings than their younger counterparts. That's another case that we settled for $700,000 in back pay to the workers who were wrongfully laid off. And then in case you think explicit age discrimination doesn't occur, just this year we sued 3 companies that provide tutoring services. They programmed their online recruitment software to automatically reject older applicants because of their age. And this is where that age and sex discrimination interplay come into play here. The company programmed the software to automatically reject female applicants age 55 or older and male applicants age 60 or older. And we found that over 200 qualified applicants were rejected based on their age. So what does it mean to be based on age? To prove age discrimination, a person must show that they were treated less favorably because of their age. And so the question is, when you have an employment decision, like a hiring decision, promotions, those types of things, is it based on an individualized assessment of job performance and a person's qualifications, or is it based on stereotypes or assumptions about workers? Put differently, is an employer holding older workers to different standards than younger workers? And here are some, the next slide is proxies for age. So this again kind of ties back to Anne's presentation about some of the phrases and things that are correlated with age discrimination. If something correlates with age, but is not directly dependent on age, that in and of itself doesn't prove age discrimination. So examples are looking for new ideas, fresh blood, someone who's tech savvy, someone who has less experience, or someone who is willing to accept a lower salary. All those things are probably correlated with age, but you absolutely could have an older worker who has new ideas or who is willing to accept, a lower salary pay because they want a particular job or a new experience. So they're correlated, but not necessarily a proxy for age. On the other hand, saying things like, I want someone who's further from retirement. That's absolutely age discrimination on its face. We also see digital natives as a concept, and that's a person who was born or brought up with digital technology, with computers or the internet from a young age. And so that type of language in a job announcement is discrimination on its face. Before I get to limits for coverage, a couple more case examples just to illustrate these points. We had a recent case involving the New Mexico Department of Corrections and a prison warden in that case. This is the promotion case. He favored younger workers over older workers for promotion. And when the warden was questioned about his decisions, he said he emphasized longevity in promotion decisions, meaning that he selected younger workers who were more likely to stay in the position longer, and that he did not want to promote workers who were close to retirement because it would be a waste of effort. Right? It's not an investment anymore, in Anne's words, it's an expense. And that was found to be age discrimination. In another recent case, a 55-year-old district general manager was told that he was being laid off as part of a reduction in force because the company wanted to, quote, rejuvenate his district and reduce costs. The court found that the term rejuvenation in and of itself was direct evidence of age discrimination because it's associated with age. And it's generally defined as making someone or something young again. And then finally, in a recent case against Hewlett Packard, the court found that calling a 60-year-old employee Uncle Ron, stating that he had old skills and asking him repeatedly when he was going to retire was proof of age bias. So those are some examples of the types of real-world cases that we see. I'm going to go through these next couple slides quickly. They're going to be in your materials, but it's always important to point out with any statute, there's always exceptions. probably aware that there's mandatory retirement age for certain jobs like police, firefighters. Um, there are federal laws that can provide an age ceiling for certain jobs, but these are all exceptions to the general rule that it must be based on ability and not your age. The final substantive point I wanted to make before we get into questions is about caregiver discrimination. So I know that's not the main topic for today's discussion, but I did want to say a quick word about it because I understand we have caregivers in the audience. Discriminating against a person with caregiving responsibilities, including elder care or caring for an adult with a disability, violates the laws that we enforce when it's based on the worker's sex, race, color, religion, age, disability, or genetic information. It's also unlawful if it's based on a worker's association with someone with a disability or on the race, ethnicity, or other protected characteristic of the individual the worker is caring for. So what does that mean? For example, if you're treated differently because you're caring for an older adult or a person with a disability, that's illegal. And the EEOC has done a lot of work in this area during the pandemic because of the increased caregiving responsibilities that so many people have assumed. A survey that AARP did back in September found that 43% of older women, so almost half, said they were caring for an adult family member, a friend, or a grandchild during the pandemic. So workplace impacts on caregivers are real and they're a serious issue. And I've included in your materials a link to our very user-friendly guidance about the protections that federal law has for caregivers. So to end here, where can you get help? EEOC.gov is an excellent resource. We have a ton of fact sheets and user guides and all sorts of things to explain your rights and your different options under the law. I've put the contact here for the EEOC Buffalo local office. Maureen Kielt is the director there. She is a dear friend and helping people who are experiencing discrimination at work is her true passion and calling. And I've included her number here as well as the address for our office, which is currently closed due to the pandemic, but we're hoping to reopen soon. And I've also included a link to the New York State Division of Human Rights. So that is the state equivalent of the EEOC, and it's another place you can go for help. And then finally, as I said, I've included just a couple resources that might be helpful to you. There's a really good report that the EEOC put out for the 50th anniversary of the ADEA a couple years ago that talks about sort of the history and how age discrimination has changed and not changed since this statute was passed. There's some fact sheets, and then I have a link to the caregiver discrimination guidance that I mentioned.
Elizabeth, before you end, there have been a couple comments about particular situations that people are in. One is around if I get transferred from one job to another without notice, does that give rise to an age discrimination complaint?
Yeah, that's a great question. Absolutely. So transfer there's a lot of law about transfer. If you're transferring someone to a job that has the same pay, the same benefits, the same prestige, it may not be. But if it's a transfer that has some type of consequence, maybe you're being paid the same, but they've put you in the back of the facility instead of the front. Or you're now driving 2 hours to work or 30 minutes to work instead of walking across the street. If there's some type of adverse impact to your transfer, or it's a less desirable location, it's a harder job, all these different things, then absolutely that could be discrimination.
Do you recommend that people go to human resources before they would come to an agency like EEOC? What do you recommend if someone believes that they have a legitimate concern?
Yeah, so it sort of depends on how comfortable you are with going to your employer. I think going to your employer is typically the best first step because employers understand the laws typically, and they can't correct it if they don't know about it. So, we have a situation where you have somebody at work who keeps, the person in the desk next to you keeps saying, hey, Ron, when are you going to retire, right? If the company doesn't know about it, they can't fix it. Or, I'm getting constant remarks about joking that I can't use technology. It's not funny. So you can address it directly with the coworker, or if it becomes a real problem or you think you're being treated differently, I do think it makes sense to file a complaint or a charge or whatever you call it with your local HR. Figure out what the process is and follow it, because you've then given them an opportunity to correct it. And if they don't, then you can come to, elevate it to the next step, come to the EEOC, come to the Division of Human Rights.
Okay. Well,
And thanks for monitoring the chat, because every time I tried to look at the chat, I accidentally advanced the slide. So
don't worry, we'll have each other's back. I'm just checking to see. Oh, one question that was here for me was, if you correct people in their use of ageist terms, does it backfire on you? And I just wanted to comment that I think that how you do it is equally as important to the fact that you do it. Keeping things in the I frame, like I said, I would prefer you use my name, is much different than saying you're using a diminishing name for me. Use my name. If you can own it as I, and this is my preference, I think my experience is that you get far less negative feedback from people than if you accuse them of being ageist in their presentation or in their words. So keep things in an I frame, talk about yourself and what you prefer is a much better way to avoid backlash from others. So that was a question in here that I wanted to address. But I think that covers the chat. So should we turn it back over then to Christine?
I was having trouble unmuting. Yeah, so if there's no more questions, I appreciate both of you, Ann and Elizabeth, for taking the time out to present today and provide such great information. I thank everyone for joining today as well, and hopefully you can join us again next week, Tuesday at 10 a.m. for a presentation on IRA distributions. Thank you again, Ann and Elizabeth.
thank you.
Thank you.